Good evening and welcome. On behalf of the Law Society and the Heritage Committee. Just to give you a little brief background, the Heritage Committee has undertaken a number of projects over the last decade. We've done interviews with groundbreaking lawyers. We've gathered information on lawyers from diverse communities, and we've conducted roundtables with a variety of groups, encouraging them to write their memoirs. We've done a roundtable with the Greek-Canadian lawyers and another with Hungarian-Canadian lawyers to discuss the role of community in their decision to become lawyers. And in the last week, we met with representatives of county law associations to try to talk them into writing their association histories. But tonight, we begin a new foray into the history of the law firm. Large law firms, as I'm sure you know, often commission their own formal biographies. There will be hardcover books on a number of the leading law firms. But our Heritage Committee is interested in smaller firms that are unique. And your firm is indeed unique. It's exactly the type of history that we want to record at the Law Society. So we were delighted at the Heritage Committee when Sophia told us that you had recently celebrated your 25th anniversary. And we were hoping that our project could dovetail with your anniversary. I don't have to tell most of you that with 9 women, you are the largest all-woman law firm in Ontario, and that a firm of women lawyers is rare even today. But a firm of all women in 1986 and earlier, as many of you were practicing in small partnerships or in association before Dunbar Sachs Appell was formed, those early women law firms really made a profound statement. And as women professionals start to learn more and recover their own history, your history is worth recording for posterity and for inspiration. So thank you so much for coming tonight and for your contributions to our legal profession. And now I'm going to ask Sophia if she will start the discussion.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Sophia. It's so great to see everybody here. I wish we were at Harriet's in the summer in our shorts, but I got you wine at least, so I think I get kudos for that, right? So I wondered if we could, just for the record, because as you know, this is being recorded and will be in our archives for future generations to research you all. So I want to just go around the room and have all of you just introduce yourselves for the record. And Judy, can you hear us?
I can.
Good. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Judy. Hi, Judy.
So we'll start with Wenda.
Wenda Jensen.
And everybody, we've got mics there, but if you could make sure you speak into the mic, that would be great. And I'm just going to move this one down because we've got some extras here. There we go. Okay, go ahead.
Wenda Jensen.
Hi, I'm Helen Feldman.
Jane Martin. Lana Nakanachny.
Shireen Langdon.
Shirley Levitan.
Sharon Cohen.
Mary MacGregor. Mary Louise Dickson.
Jan Burton.
Deborah McLeod.
Yolanda Lewis.
Marion Lane.
Cheryl Appell.
Jill Kelsall.
Harriet Sachs.
So delightful.
Now you've got to put yourself there.
Oh, Sophia Sperdakos.
Yeah.
So in setting the stage for the discussion, I thought I'd just take a minute or two to set the firm in the wider context of women's place in the profession. So just a few stats. Between 1898 and 1923, when Clara Brett Martin was called and died, 100 women were called to the bar in that entire period. By the late 50s, more than half a century later, under 200 women had been called to the bar. By 71, we represented only 5% of the profession, and by 1990, we were at 22%. This year, we're at 40%. By 1965, we represented only 6% of law students. By 73, it was 20%. And then it began to move, and by 1980, over 35%, and today we make up more than half of the law students. The numbers illustrate the glacial progress until the late 70s, but behind the numbers were stories that illustrated even further the challenges that women have faced in trying to mold themselves into a male-dominated model. Two women at the call to the bar in the late 1930s were told by the presiding judge, a former bencher, that he did not welcome them and regretted the money their parents had spent on their education, while their parents were sitting there in the room celebrating with their daughters. Laura Legg was ostensibly the first woman bencher elected in 1975, but she was always quick to tell the story that, in fact, she should have been the second, because Margaret Hindman, who was a well-known litigator, was actually the first woman. But in the way it used to work, when a bencher was appointed to the bench or otherwise left, they moved down the line in the order of people who'd been elected, the numbers next. And Hindman was the next one, but they skipped her for a man. So she really should have been the first, and Laura was always quick to point that out. Osgoode Hall, where we are, had no robing rooms for women until the late 1940s. Sexist articling interviews were the norm for many, and I know some of you have recounted your stories. I have a particularly fond one of Harriet's, in which the interviewer told her the firm had never hired a woman, but he'd liked her resume and hoped he could get a date with her. Oh. That was one of my favorites. The sexism of law schools was extremely well known. Obiter Dicta in 1969 had a bikini-clad young woman who appeared on the pages on a regular basis for no particular reason. And today, of course, women continue to be underrepresented as partners in traditional law firms. The road that led you to this firm and its various iterations began much earlier with your decision to go to law school. And although I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, I'd just like to see if we can have a little bit of a conversation about that to get the context that ultimately led you here. So I throw it open to you. Why did you go to law school? Somebody start? Anybody start? Were you encouraged or discouraged? And at the point that you entered, were there female role models for what you were doing?
I can speak to the female role models issue. I entered in 1970, and the year before, there were 40 out of 300, 40 women out of 300 students at first year Osgoode. But the year before us, there had been, I believe, 6. So we were the first number. And it was really interesting. Generally the male students were just fine. I mean, most of them had thought they were coming to the military, and so they were kind of relieved to just have some, to have it softened a little bit. But certainly some of the, for the profs it was difficult, and certainly when we got out into the world, into articling interviews, it was quite clear that we were the first numbers that they had to deal with, and they sure didn't know how to deal with it.
Other people? Mary Louise, you were here, right? You were at Osgoode Hall.
I was here, that's right.
And what was it like for you? How many women were there in your group? Do you remember?
It was 4 started and 3 finished out of about 100. And it was good for me. They were all great to me.
Then you didn't experience any difficulties with the students or anything like that?
No.
Why did you go to law school?
Because you haven't heard the story.
No. And it's for posterity, so what the heck?
That's a good story. Because I cried for 3 days when I wasn't invited to the party. And my father told me he had more bad news, that they weren't going to be able to support me, and I better go to be a lawyer. I was 14. And I grabbed onto that. That's what I did.
Marvelous. Other people?
In my early 40s, I was having a career crisis. I'd had another career for 20 years, and somebody asked me what I'd be proud to say I did for a living. So I went to law school.
Jan, it's your second career too.
Yeah, it was my third career, actually.
Third.
I was 40 when I went to law school. I'd been teaching at a community college for 12 years, and before that I'd been a secretary, having graduated from secretarial science at Western. And I was going through a big change in my life, and just sort of on impulse, actually, and at the last minute applied to law school. And that was in early '82, and I started in September at Queen's, and Second best thing I ever did.
We know what the first one was. What about some of the younger calls? So you, Jane, you said that this is your second, or you came to it later too, right? So
That's right. Prior to law school, I worked in community mental health with a group of adults who are mentally ill and mentally handicapped in Victoria, BC. And I ran the craft program and had a petty cash of $100 a month to design activities for 20 people for 5 mornings a week. And I was in the craft supply aisle at Walmart trying to remember if the glue sticks at Walmart were more expensive than the glue sticks at Zeller's, and decided that maybe I needed to upgrade my philosophy degree, and took the bus right to the University of Victoria and got the LSAT application. Also working with those clients, recognized that there were systemic issues that my clients were facing that no one cared what I had to say about as a frontline worker. And I thought, well, what do I need after my name for someone to care what I have to say? So that was in there too.
of course, by the time you went, there were a lot of women
Yes.
at law school, so it wasn't the same issues. But were there still issues, being a woman?
Absolutely. Actually, articling or summer job interviews, because I was in my early 30s and looked older than a lot of my classmates. It was interesting watching interviewers try to figure out my marital status and whether or not I have kids and that sort of thing when they're doing the calculus of whether or not you're a good hire for a summer job or an articling job. So it was there.
Judy,
Yes,
why'd you go to law school?
I went, I'd originally said I would become a psychologist, but then I knew I couldn't do the stats, so I took a year off and traveled around and contemplated what I was going to do, and seemed like a good choice. So I put my application in, never thinking I'd actually get in, and I did. Here was a mistake, really I intended to admit.
What year, Judy? What year were you in law school?
72 to 75.
How many were you at Queen's?
Yes.
How many women in your class?
Oh, I think B and 8.
That's cutting out. You're cutting out. Say that again.
23,
23. Okay.
18 graduates.
18 graduates. Any other thoughts? Anybody else want to talk about that?
I grew up in a family with 4 daughters and 1 son, not mine, obviously, and pretty traditional parents. And there was no secret that the son was going to be the prodigal son, and he was going to go off and be a professional, and that's sort of how he had been tailored from birth. And the 4 daughters would go off and get married, and somebody else would take care of them. Well, joke's on them. Anyway, so it just took a long time. But how it wasn't traditional, though, was that my mother returned to university when we were old enough to make our own lunches. And she really is an academic at heart and loved what she did. And I remember very clearly my father saying, "Sally, it's time to come to bed already. It's midnight. You know, you don't. How much can you study in one day?" And she did very well. She studied religion and art history and has been a docent to the gallery in Canada and has traveled all over the world taking groups. And I just remember watching this, thinking, feeling very proud actually of that accomplishment of hers, and thinking, I don't want to be in a position where I am financially dependent on somebody else, because it was a traditional marriage in all other ways. And I want to be able to take care of myself. And just as I got older, that became more and more enshrined. And ultimately, it just became really a choice, which route are you going to take? And I think this route took me more than the other way around.
Mary?
I had two reasons for going to law school. The first was probably fairly venal, because I have an older sister who's 15 months older than me, and we've competed all of our lives. And she has always wanted to be a doctor. And what I really wanted to do was to go into education. But in fact, that didn't really stand up to being the doctor, my daughter the doctor, you know. So I went into law school, and it turned out I was okay at it. But the other reason was my father was a darling man, but he was not a strong man, and he had a spotty work history and that sort of thing. My mother was the strength of the family, and we grew up thinking that women could do anything they wanted to do, even way back then, because we were little children in the 50s and teenagers in the 60s, and we believed that completely.
Did most people have supportive parents?
Okay, I was going to weigh in because I'm sort of the opposite to your story. My father was the one who said, I want to be a teacher, as everyone knows. And it was my dad who said, you know, you've got to pursue a profession. You can pursue a profession. You've been, you know, admitted, just go. And forced me to go. And there was no question of, my gender was irrelevant to that. He just thought it was a good opportunity. So my father was very supportive, and in fact steered me towards law, though I wanted to be in education, and ultimately re-steered myself, but it took a while. So I think I had a pretty aberrant experience in that I came to it a little unwillingly, but with tremendous parental support.
It's funny, I came completely unwillingly.
Yeah.
My older brother was killed when we were small, and my middle brother, my older brother now, was sort of indulged a little bit to do whatever he chose to do, I think because my parents suffered from having lost their oldest son so young. So when it came to me, I was the youngest, and I was like the last shining hope of the family, because my brother went to college, not to university, and neither of my parents went to university. So as immigrant parents, they said one of these kids has to go to university. So I got accepted to go to the National Theatre School, which at the time gave just diplomas, they didn't give degrees. And the only time I ever saw my parents fight, or heard my parents fight, was when I said I wanted to go to the National Theatre School, and my mother said, absolutely not, because if you don't get a degree, you can't go to law school. And someone in this family is going to go to law school. And it was me. So that was the sort of the compromise. I ended up going to Brock, and I got my Bachelor of Fine Arts in acting, and then went on to go to law school.
Well, I have an ethnic element to it as well, because in Chinese families, they name their sons things like mighty scholar, endure great deeds, and their daughters are all named Harvest Moon, stuff like that. So on my father's side, my brother is the scholar of the Eastern world, and all of us have these really sucky names. And my mother said, look, we had to do this, but I fully expect that you will do as good as or better than your brother. There's 1 boy and 4 girls. And she said, and we expect that all of you will go to university and then go on and do something professional. So in my family, because there were a lot of males in the Jensen family, at last count there were about 15 Dr. Jensens, and I thought, well, we don't need another doctor, so then what could I do? So went through, could I be an architect? No, I couldn't do that. Could I be an engineer? No, I couldn't do that. And a very good friend of our family was a lawyer, and I thought, we now realize it was the person, not the profession, but I thought, I'll just be like Charles Horgan. So I applied to law school, so it was not because I grew up wanting desperately to be a lawyer, it's just because I kind of got there by the back door.
Yeah.
And my name is Tinkling Jade.
But it disarms them in the courts.
I know, when you sign in and you put your name, that always kind of gets me.
You should see her website.
Well, that's great. Anything else just before I move on? Yes?
I'm a child of a lawyer, and my grandfather was also a lawyer, but my father left Poland when the Second World War broke out, and by the time he got to Canada, when everything settled, it was too late for him to go back and start again. So there was a huge amount of encouragement to follow that path. And my mother had been orphaned at a very young age, and so both of my parents had the experience of having to be self-sufficient. And for my father, I think it was quite a rude shock because he'd had a very comfortable life before the war broke out. So both my sister and I were given the message loud and clear that you have to have a profession. You can't rely on or expect that you're going to be taken care of, you know, if you get married. And we encourage you to go to law school, and so I did.
So actually, I mean, it's a fairly consistent amount of encouragement, really, which, I mean, it would be interesting to know how usual that is, but it's quite interesting to me that for most of the people in the room, there's been at least some go to professional school, go to law school, or, you know, the like. And one wonders whether your own attitudes as you've gone forward, you've carried that with you that have allowed you to deal with some of the gender issues that, you know, you might otherwise feel a little more vulnerable if you hadn't been supported when you go in. So that's quite interesting, actually. On that issue of gender, I mean, you know, we interviewed Laura Legg at a point, and for those of you who knew Laura, she tended to be of the school of the first women who were called to the bar, which was basically, don't talk about discrimination. You just did your best. You were a lawyer, not a woman lawyer. You went ahead, and gender was not an issue. That was at least her articulated view. And I think that was pretty common of the first generation of women lawyers. There weren't very many of them, and that was the way they felt they had to address things. But in terms of your experience, we talked a little bit about it, but what role, if any, did gender play in your law school experience, but also in your starting to think about what you wanted to do when you went out into practice? And you all ended up in this all-female firm. So we're going to get into that in a minute. So just hold that. But before we get into that, Judy, unfortunately, you can't see what I'm about to do here, if I can get to it. Watch the screens, everybody, when I get to this. This is 1986, for those of you who might remember this.
Stressful hours in the courtroom and the office and heavy client loads are all part of the average law firm. But there is an all-woman partnership where long hours and competitive environment is the exception rather than the rule. The architect of this unique workplace, Mary Dunbar.
When I was pregnant the first time, I decided that I should leave where I was practicing because it was downtown, took time to get back and forth. It was a big Bay Street building with big Bay Street overhead and all of those things. And so I started looking for office space with other women who also were interested in the kind of practice I was interested in.
Ma'am, is it possible on line 2?
Thank you.
Dunbar Sachs Appell is said to be the largest all-women law firm in North America. What makes these lawyers different from the traditional law firm is their relaxed work environment. Their success is not measured by the length of their client list, but by keeping their caseload down to a manageable size, ensuring themselves a balance between work and home. Offices are empty by 5:30, and shared workload and responsibility all help to keep the family a high priority.
People kept calling and saying, I'm making a change, and if I wanted to practice anywhere, it would be with you. Would you be interested in having me or us come practice with you? And yes. The people that have come at perfect times, and they have been perfect people. And so it's just grown.
How do I stop it? My question.
Stressful hours in the courtroom and
Sorry,
the
folks,
office.
my technology skills are limited. Mary, as you see there, Mary came to it at a certain point in her experience. She'd been in a traditional firm setting. She came at a particular stage in life, and she speaks about looking for like-minded women to practice with her. But for her, it was an evolutionary process. And some of you started out right from the beginning. So Harriet, for example, you started out right away. You knew it in bar ads. You were going to work with other women. So I guess that's my question to begin with is, how did you reach the point that you did, that you said, I want to work in this kind of firm environment, all-women firm environment? And I'm going to start with you, Harriet.
I
think for me it was a twofold thing, well, maybe three. I felt from the moment I went to law school that it wasn't a place where where I could see a way to be that was set, that somehow I was going to have to find a way to do law and become who I was. And in law school, I mean, in my section there were either 2 or 3 women in a section of 60. And one of those women was a woman called Catherine Meanwell, and we became extremely close. And essentially, she and I decided to practice together, and that was our dream throughout law school. We were both feminists. We were both very interested in women's issues. We were both political, and we saw this as a way to be with somebody we loved and also do what we really cared about. And then she ended up moving out of Toronto, and so during bar ads, she gave me the bad news that that dream wasn't going to happen. But by that point, I was pretty clear that if I was going to survive in law, I was going to do it with women. So I found another group of women, 2 of whom were in my bar ad course, and well, maybe, yeah, Mary was. She came back and so Mary, there were 2 of whom were in my bar ad course, and one of whom had practiced law for 2 years. To us, she was like the leader of the profession from a women's perspective. And she was willing to be our counsel. She was taking a year off and teaching at Osgood, but she was willing to be our mentor. So we basically decided, towards the end of bar ads, we started meeting and got together and decided to form a law firm together. And again, what we had in common was, I think a lot of it was very driven by our sense of our own politics and our desire to, our self-identity as feminists and our desire to work on women's issues and try and do what we could to bring about some change.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the self-employment aspect of it gives you a certain amount of that freedom to be able to do things. You're not in a big firm setting where you're being directed down from the top as to what you might be able to do or not do.
Well, this gets back to, and I suppose this is not why I practice with women, but I knew, the reason I became a lawyer was because I knew I never wanted to have a boss. So the self-employment aspect of it was really a driving agenda for me from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. You said 3 things. What was the third?
No place, be with somebody I love or care about. By this point, these women were friends of mine, the ones that I ended up practicing with, and it was politically driven as well.
Okay. Other people? Who started, who else, well, the people who were working with Mary, some of you were just newly called at that point, or had some of you come? Mary?
Cheryl started. Rosalie Abella introduced me to Mary Dunbar, and Mary Dunbar and I located the office on Birch Avenue.
Yeah.
And we were very fortunate at that point in time because Mary had come into Toronto from Kingston with a lot of people around George Thompson, and Judy Beeman was in that group as well, and there were lots of others. And then we were talking about forming our group, and we had a phone call from Esther Linkinski, and she wanted to know if there was any potential that Cheryl Appell could join us. We were thrilled because we knew Cheryl professionally, and I'd known Cheryl as a student. She was a year ahead of me at Osgood. So the 4 of us, I think it was in the spring of 1983, came together on Birch Avenue. And it was called Dunbar Lane and Associates in those days, but then it went through various incarnations.
Yeah, I was on that information sheet that I asked you to fill out. And I asked you to give me the name of the firm while you were there. So Cheryl gets the record. Because if I can find it, I will find it at some point. Cheryl has been through every single iteration of the firm name. So, and I understand for some it was a challenge to try to remember what all that was. But yeah, here we go. Cheryl. Dunbar Lane Associates, Dunbar and Associates, Dunbar Sachs Appell, Dickson Sachs Appell and Beeman, Dickson Sachs Appell and Burton, Dickson MacGregor Appell and Burton, Dickson MacGregor Appell.
when my brother called one of those times and said, like, what's the name of your firm? I said, how about I tell you on a need-to-know basis?
Well, Cheryl, didn't we have a Dutch receptionist once?
Oh, yes, we
tell
did.
that
It was,
story
I think,
pronounced-
Judy's nanny who was helping as a receptionist at one point, and she pronounced it, if I recall, Dunbar Sachs Appell. But I also have to say that technically in terms of timing, it was Mary, Marion, and Judy who actually started Dunbar Lane Associates. And I came actually a month later, but it was it's very, for me, a funny story. I've been practicing for 8 years with Esther, and it was June 30th, 1983. I have a really distinct memory of this because I came in with all of my boxes and all of the chaos. And I don't know if you recall, but in those days, June 30th was the nightmare day in practice because all the houses closed then, and everybody kidnapped their kids then to get them, when school was out. It was just like one emergency after another, and I just walked in the middle of all this. Well, all three, Judy, Marion, Mary, and Judy, were all planning holidays. Like that was their last day, and I walked in with Irene Shapiro, who was a articling student, had worked with Esther and I, but thank God she was there. But I just remember I'd walked in this total chaos, the end of June, and no end of phone calls, and they're just all like totally just going to step away, which they did for like something like 3 weeks, and it was just to me a total shock. But I thought, okay, that was, that was their motivation to be able to have this balance, and they were going to do it. I don't know what they would have done if I hadn't come.
Close the doors for 3 weeks. Other people? Why did you end up in a female firm?
I read the article, How the Peanut Butter Got on the Will. That was in January '87. I was in the bar ads. I was going to be clerking for a year, but then after that, I thought, I would love to be at this firm. And I started my practice next door in the spring of '88. And then Margot Hallman, who couldn't be here today, was leaving practice to go into mediation, and she suggested perhaps I would like to move next door. And I started packing my boxes and landed in the only place that I really wanted to practice law.
Other people?
Well, I had articled and practiced for 1 year at Litigation Boutiques, and I wasn't doing very well, and I had met Harriet and Judy and Jan, Harriet and Judy on a file that we had shared, and I saw the ad in the ORs where Marion and Mary were appointed looking for someone. I picked up the phone instantaneously. I called Harriet. I think it was a Tuesday. We had lunch on the Thursday, and by Thursday I said, I'm coming if you'll have me, and that was the end of it. I couldn't wait. Couldn't wait.
And I saw the same ad, Sharon, and that was exactly the same time. I had just had my baby and was home for Sun and was home on mat leave and lining up to go back to Gowlings. I'd been working with Stephen and saw the same ad and thought, oh my God, it's heaven sent. And whooped on the phone, same deal, and had an interview with Harriet. And it was interesting because I grew up, my mom was a little leery of women, and for complicated reasons, but she was leery of women and taught me to be leery of women. So I kind of came from the opposite side. I was a little weirded out by the idea of working in an all-women's practice because I'd avoided residence in university because I was frightened of living with women. And it was only at university that I began to make really powerful female friendships and kind of get out from under this fear that I'd grown up with. And when I met Harriet and the Dickson Sachs group at that point, Cheryl and Judy, I thought, that trajectory had finally landed and I was where I belonged, and I really was so happy.
You lasted 2 seconds.
I lasted 2 seconds because we moved to London, and that was the way it went. But I was really happy.
But they were a happy 2 seconds.
Happy 2 seconds, yeah.
Other people?
Yeah.
Mary Louise, how did you end up?
Well,
Tell the story.
I was working all the time as usual at McCarthy's night and day, and on the Federal Human Rights Commission, going to Ottawa 3 days a month, 9 times a year. and it was January, and the snow was piled up, and I was sick. And Mary Dunbar called me with a trust question. She had some question about a trust. She said, "Hello, how are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm terrible. I'm sick, it's snowing, and piled up." And she said, "Holidays." That's what reminded me. She said, "What about holidays?" I said, "Well, 3 days a month, 9 times a year, going to Ottawa. There's my and reading 2,000 or 3,000 pages. There is my holidays at McCarthy's." And she said, "You're crazy. Why don't you come with us? We have a space." And I just hung up. And then I started to think about it. And I thought, this is crazy, but I think I'll do it. So I phoned her back, and I just quit everything. And the clients followed me. It was very interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
I was going to say, I got to the firm, I blame Connie Backhouse a little bit, that I got slightly obsessed with feminist legal analysis during law school because we took a course. And it just spoke to me and was interesting, and I just couldn't figure out a way to translate that into a job. So through Careers Day at Western, I don't think there were many other speakers other than the big firms. So I had read the article about the peanut butter on the whale, and I had met Mary Dunbar at the same time, so there were sort of things converging. I ended up not working right after law school in a law firm. I worked for Leaf, and but then reading about that and talking to Mary really got my sights on the law firm, and I wanted to work articles so badly, but there weren't articling students at Dickson, whatever it was called back then. So I had a detour for a little while working at a small firm doing charter issues and mental health issues. And that's how I ended up, eventually, I think I took Deborah's spot 5 years later. That was my journey.
Yeah, Helen.
I had heard about the firm when I was in law school in the mid-'80s. I had gone to law school as a mature student, and I'd actually taken a course with George Thompson, Judy's husband, and I remember him talking about Judy, and I thought the firm sounded wonderful. I think when I went in, I've been a traditional stay-at-home mum, and I did volunteer work with the YWCA and with Children's Aid when I was raising kids. And I think law school appealed to me, or a career as a lawyer appealed as a way to be independent. And I'd worked out in Mississauga, and then I was actually in Australia. My husband called me and said, oh, a friend had told him that there was an opening at the firm. And I think he called Marion and arranged an interview for when I came back. And it really appealed. I really liked everybody. I think the idea of being independent and being able to have a home life really appealed, and I thought everyone was wonderful. I'd taken some feminist legal analysis courses at law school and was a little shocked with the reaction of some of the students who weren't in that course, who tended to belittle the course, and even some of the women who never had kids, you know, who were young before they were really in long-term partnerships, thinking, well, you know, being a woman, if you want to have a family, you can have it all. It doesn't make a difference. And I found that was something that it surprised me at the time. I thought it wasn't realistic. And it's an ongoing issue for women. And I think the firm offered an opportunity to practice in a way I wanted to. The other thing I remember from a careers day at law school was someone from one of the bigger firms had said, if you wanted to join a big firm, you had to adapt to the firm's culture. It would not adapt to you. And I think in joining this firm, I mean, it was a group of like-minded people. Everybody had different interests and backgrounds, but we had really a commonality of goals and really a willingness to share, to discuss all kinds of ideas, and was very supportive.
And just to go back for a minute and talk about that point at which Lane and Associates, or whatever they were called, Dunbar Lane and Associates, and Harriet and I came to the firm. How did that come about? I know logistically Lynn King had been appointed to the bench, and Harriet, I think you didn't want to just be on your own, but how did that actually happen? And was it also, I think, you went from being and associates to being a firm, coming together as a firm, and I'm wondering whether there was some discussion about wanting to move yourselves into a different place in terms of the way you were identified outside, or how that came about. How did the firm come about?
I think the merger, Cheryl is a good person to talk to about this, but I think again it was, my recollection of what was happening at the time was that Lynn, whom we were with, had not yet been appointed, but there was a spot, and the two top candidates for that spot were Lynn King and Mary Dunbar. And it was going to be one of the two of them. It basically seemed to be the lay of the land. And our lease was coming to an end. I wanted to be with a bigger group of women, and I think it was Esther.
It was again Esther, the matchmaker. Yeah.
Esther Lankinsky, the matchmaker.
She knew because she was friends with Harriet, and she knew because I'd been telling her that our lease was up, and I also told her, you know, that I knew that Mary had applied to the bench, and it felt like an echo because she then spoke to Harriet, who was, you know, worrying about the same issues. And so I remember, I guess it was 1986, getting a call from Harriet saying, well, I understand your lease is up, our lease is up. There's going to be one of these two people are going to be appointed. So why don't we just talk about getting together, you know, it'll either be two, well, we thought one of the two would be appointed, but even if they weren't, that they could both come, or one of them could come, it didn't matter. And I mean, the rest was history. And I guess your other question, I thought Dunbar Lane Associates, I think we presented ourselves as a firm, but probably not to the same extent as when we merged and it became Dunbar Sachs Appell. And but you know, we of course you know that it is not a traditional.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. Yeah.
But I think certainly we presented ourselves in that way, and we're conscious of it, and actually started talking about possibly having a partnership agreement.
I on that point, I had a draft of it in pencil, and I was going to look for it last night, and I didn't. But it was pages and pages, and we just kept pulling it out every year and putting it back in the box. So yeah, I think that's right. That in the sort of the other thing I just remembering it was that the space that we moved to on Birch was a better space than the one you guys had been in. It was a much more. They did some work for us, didn't they?
It was a brand new space.
Yeah, it was a brand new space.
The space that we had been in, was warehouse looking, and I think it was part of also the original philosophy of keep the cost down as much as you possibly can, nothing extra, and then of course, you know, that went by the wayside each year more and more. But that was the original plan, to be able to not be dictated by the overhead, and to therefore have some freedom to, you know, to have the balance, etc. So the first space was very sparse, and the next a little bit better.
Yeah. Because you've talked about when you went to 111 Richmond that the three of you were interested in making sure that the space looked really good, because you wanted to attract people who would think that you were doing really well, that you had an image of what you wanted to present, good library and the whole bit.
Well, the mentorship we received when we were setting up our firm from the people that we knew in the legal profession was that rent isn't going to be the biggest part of your overhead. So if you can, and working in a nice space mattered to me, and I think to the other three women that I was working with. And we also thought that it would, since, you know, it's one of those situations when we were the first, along with Cheryl, I guess Cheryl and Esther were the first, and a year later it was us and one other group of women. So we were a very new phenomenon, and we decided to sort of set up in Richmond near Bay Street, and to have offices that felt professional, not necessarily totally traditionally professional, but felt and looked like they were professional, so that to the extent that there was any nervousness about it, it would be reduced. And our call was that this wasn't going to be a big part of our costs.
Right.
Staff is what really, so we really at the beginning really kept the staff load low. And only as we started to make more money did we start increasing the staff. But yeah, and we decided if we were going to do this, we were going to do this well, and part of doing it well meant having a good library, and therefore we were going to make our investment in that.
So I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, we've sort of been talking about it, the sort of the creation of the all-woman law firm, but I just want to, Judy, I'm sorry you're not here to see this next clip, because you're at the center of it.
Okay.
Could you hear that other clip, Judy?
Very, very.
Yeah, okay.
It's not unusual to see the children of clients in the offices of a family law practice. In this case, however, they're not clients' children. They're some of the children of the 8 partners that make up this corporate family.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of working within an all-female firm?
I think it's the general supportive environment that's here. It's the knowledge that if you ever run into any difficulties in terms of your home life or even in your practice, not having enough time, there's always somebody there whom you can call upon to help you. And I don't know that that would be necessarily available in your traditional type law firm.
It's not unusual to see the children of clients in the offices of a family law practice. In this case, however, they're not clients' children. They're some of the children of the 8 partners that make up this corporate family.
He's probably about 30 now, right? Just got one more segment from this. I found this on a VHS tape at my house. It was also in a box. I think it was about 1986. Do you remember when this was done?
Well, we didn't go there till 1986, so
yeah,
it would have been after that.
Is that, I can't tell from that, that's the new premise?
No, that's still virgin.
Is that,
Gauging by the size of Brendan, who's Margot's son, it would have been a year later.
Yeah. So how old is he, Yo?
Oh, he was born in 1985. That's when I joined the firm. So there you go, do the math.
Well, my 2 boys are in that clip, and one of them is now 35, and the other one's 33.
Yeah. Designed a method within the firm dealing with the lifestyle pressures of these family people as well as professionals. Do you think that that's going to limit you as a firm? We have to worry about earning enough to pay the overhead, and we have to worry about earning enough to earn something in addition to that. So we are not able to do as much as we would outside of the practice or inside the practice. In other words, we can't do as much free. We can't take on as many things that we would on a voluntary basis inside the profession. When I found out I was pregnant over 5 years ago, I dropped off all the boards of directors that I was on, and I have not gone back. And I won't now that I've had another child until he's quite a bit older as well. Our commitment to our kids and to our families does limit those things that we would do otherwise. Some critics may say that by being as committed to your family as you are, that you can't be committed to your work. How do you respond to that? I wouldn't say we're less committed. While we're here, we're totally committed. And we certainly are here what I consider to be a normal working day. We've set the office up in a way that our clients will be well looked after no matter what happens. We take fewer clients than we would if we were working in a large firm. That's basically the difference. Your associates have designed a method within the firm of dealing with the lifestyle pressures of being family people as well as professionals. Do you think that that's going to limit you as a firm? We have to worry about earning enough to pay the overhead, and we have to worry about earning enough to earn something in addition to that. So we are not able to do as much as we would outside of the practice.
Back to the beginning.
Or inside the practice. In other words, we can't do as much free. We can't take on as many things that we would on a voluntary basis inside the profession. When I found out I was pregnant over 5 years
trying to
ago.
stop this.
I dropped off all the boards of
So
directors that
what
I
I
was
want
on,
to talk
and I
about
have not
is
gone back. And I will now that I've had another
the
job.
structure of the firm,
until
and if I
things
could
are
stop
a
the
bit
strategy,
more
I think it would help. There's Mary.
Our commitment to
There
our
we go.
kids and to our families does limit those things that we would do otherwise.
Some critics may say that by being as committed
Those
to
critics,
your family
they
as you
just
are,
don't
that
want to
you
stop.
can't be committed to your work. How do you respond to that?
I wouldn't say we're less committed. Well, we're here, we're totally committed.
Try
And
shutting
certainly
it
are
down.
here
Plug
what
it.
I consider to be a normal working day.
Techno guy, I need help.
Our clients will be well looked after no matter what happens.
Somebody's
we take
moving.
fewer clients than we would if we were working in a large firm. That's
Sorry,
basically
everybody.
it.
No.
Lifestyle
I can't get it to stop.
as well as professionals. Do you think
Techno.
that that's going to limit you as a
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry about that, folks. So in terms of the firm structure, maybe we can just take a minute to talk about that. Cheryl, you were about to start talking about that. If you wouldn't mind, just sort of talk about the structure of the firm.
Okay, so I think what makes it quite different than than a traditional partnership is the fact that although we share expenses, hold ourselves out as partners in terms of liability and professional development and that sort of thing, we have separate, our books are separate in terms of the actual billings and our own income. We pay our expenses. There are expenses that are, of course, communal expenses, and then we have individual expenses on top of that. But we don't share. We don't share billings. We don't share income in that way, so that people are completely free to make their own decision about how much they're going to work, how much they're going to earn. I mean, obviously they have to earn enough to be able to pay their expenses, but it's been incredibly freeing, and it's absolutely puzzling to me why this isn't a model that gets picked up generally. I just do not understand, because it's given everyone the freedom to do what they need to do in terms of their families and the balance I talked about in terms of, later on, more and more people were doing more extracurricular. Do you know what I mean? Who were on boards and, Harriet with the Advocate Society and ventures and all of that sort of, and they weren't answerable to anyone. So, and if somebody wanted to take a holiday, they didn't have to. It didn't affect anyone really, other than we did all pitch in terms of making sure that a practice was covered. So I think that it just takes all of the pressure off and between us.
Right.
But what is fascinating to me is I think that if anyone walking in from the outside, kind of just observing what goes on and has always gone on with this practice and with us, I don't think they would ever twig to the fact that this wasn't a traditional partnership, because I think there's so much in the way of helping each other, mentorship, of freely sending clients back and forth and referrals, and nobody's counting anything, and if there's a problem, we're all sitting around helping each other, and so that there is a sense of community, absolutely, and of joint venture and all of that, but we just aren't in each other's pockets in the same way that you would see in a traditional partnership.
And for others, was that one of the things that attracted you to the firm?
Oh, absolute control. I mean, I escaped from Bay Street, and I have Mary MacGregor to thank for getting me to the firm, because I wanted more control. Because even if you're a partner in a Bay Street law firm, it's like being a minority shareholder. You actually don't have very much say or very much control, other than voting in the executive committee every so often. And I was at a stage of my life in practice where I wanted to be able to take more time off and not having to come in every day to financial stuff with round brackets and having to do memos to various committees to be able to write off time or take clients or not take clients and so on. And I realized that in a big firm that has a lot of pluses, but the minus is that you've got to fit within their practice structure. Coming to Dickson's, it's it's complete financial independence. Every one of us, each runs our own profit and loss center, and you can decide whether or not you want to be at a profit or loss, as long as you meet your 1/9 share. And I think that's what's very attractive to me, is the control of who I take on as clients, how hard I work or how hard I don't work, and nobody looks askance at it at all. In fact, when I go on holiday, I try and encourage many of them to come with me. So that works really well.
We worry about if the plane goes down.
Others?
Those of us
Something
who
to
are
say about that?
I remember early days when I was a brand new lawyer, although I was 46 when I started to practice. And I had worked in large organizations before going to law school, and I really just wanted to work for myself and see a connection between the work I put in and what I took out of it. But I remember, you know, in those early days when you really don't know what you're doing and it takes so long to just do anything, Judy Beeman said to me one Monday morning, "I saw your car in the parking lot on Saturday. How come it was there? Were you in here?" And this was such a complete opposite to my experience articling in a large firm, where if you left at 8 o'clock at night, you were looked at askance because you were leaving a bit too early. So that was really struck home with me, the support there and the expectation that one is to have a life as well as practice.
Well, just injecting myself for a moment, I remember I was Harriet's junior, because I was employed by Harriet and Lynn. So we came, and I was still her junior for the first year, I think it was. And then I remember Harriet coming into the office one day and saying, "We don't really want to have a junior anymore, and you can do this. You can do this yourself. You've now been practicing for, I guess it was 2 or 3 years. Or maybe, no, it was more than that. It was 4 or 5 by then. You can do this." And I remember thinking, I can, in this environment, I can do this. It'll be okay. I feel comfortable enough. I feel like I'm supported enough. Harriet was right there. And so, but I do you remember that conversation?
Not really, but we must have had it.
Yeah. What about other people? When you came from those of you who came from other kinds of practices?
I had way more mentoring and supervision among my partners than I ever had as an employee or an articling student. So for me, it was leaping forward as a sole practitioner, really, but with incredible support and knowledge and experience all around me. So it made it possible and enjoyable.
Judy? Are you there, Judy? What about you?
Well, for me, it worked brilliantly, because I didn't want to have to answer to anybody else about my work hours, and I felt that this was the ideal arrangement. I could then feel asked for others who wanted to take time off, feel resentful. And it just, to me, was such a simple formula that worked so brilliantly.
Why do you think it isn't taken up by others? Because I mean, you know, while I was preparing for this, I was reading some article about, you know, partnerships and the struggles that the partnership model is facing, and they're all going on about it, about the various ways, and the non-equity partner and the this and that, and not one of them is talking about a different structure, your structure. Why do you think it hasn't taken?
Because people want a hierarchy and they want to earn money on the labors of others. We do not.
And is it primarily a male model, do you think?
No.
No?
I think there's more to it. I think there, you know, as Cheryl explained and described, whatever. The firm, everyone shares expenses, but everyone runs their own practice independently. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are afraid to take that step because they don't have whatever they perceive as some comfort from being part of this huge corporation. I mean, I articled and worked at when I first started, and it's 180 degrees different from the philosophy at Dickson. There was, maybe I shouldn't have said, maybe you can strike the name of the firm from the record, but I think the philosophy is the same at many of these big corporations. The more tired and sickly you looked,
seriously, the more accolades you got. And there was one person who obviously shall remain nameless, who actually used to put makeup, under, I'm not even going to say which gender it was, under his/her eyes to look more tired. No, seriously, I'm not making, you can't make this up, because this was the claim to fame. And and people, sneaking out and finding ways to exit so you wouldn't be caught, at 8 or 9 at night. Oh, there you are, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, strike the name of the firm from the record. It's not about the firm, it's about the policy.
Now it's out there.
I'll own to that. I remember I would not wear makeup if I had too much work going on, because I knew if I had dark circles and if I just they saw my normal face, they'd say, "Oh, you look really tired," and they go to the next person and give them a file. So it was my defense strategy. I'm not kidding. That was how I avoided. If I was exhausted, I would just simply stop wearing makeup, and then they would leave me alone for a few days, and I'd catch up, and then I put my makeup back on and get more work. It was just as simple as that. Crazy the truth.
Thank you. For the people who've left the firm and gone to other places, how has that been, or what's that experience been like? Who's left?
You, Deborah.
Yeah.
She hasn't talked.
Well, I think I was very lucky to land in a small firm, and going from an all-woman firm to being the only woman in a small firm, but with an incredibly supportive and great group of lawyers. And interestingly enough, very much a partnership, but very similar to the structure that we had at Dunbar Sachs. And anyway, so it's worked out really well. And I think what being at Dunbar Sachs did was give me the confidence to both, because I come from a firm where I was an associate, but it gave me the experience to run my own practice, but also the confidence of I can do this, and I can make a contribution and build a practice somewhere else. And it took a little while, but it happened, and so it's worked out very well for me. Still miss it though.
So, do I see a hand somewhere else? Who else has gone somewhere else now?
I'm right downstairs.
It's you left the building, but you didn't leave the building, right? Anybody else gone elsewhere? Or you've gone into retirement. That's what happens. Well, yeah. Well, we had, Well, I mean, that's the other thing, of course. That wonderful clip where she says, do you think you're limiting yourselves? Do you, whatever. So I went off and I found a list of the various and sundry. I don't have it now. Of the various and sundry awards and who we are, who you all are. And there's an Order of Canada, 4 judges, 2 benchers, founding members of organizations, board members, members on the expert panel on infertility and adoption, the OBA Trust and Estates Section Award in 2011, president of the Metropolitan Toronto Lawyers Association, president of the Advocate Society. Judy's the regional senior judge. I mean, it didn't seem to hold you back here.
God, I hate to be limited like that.
But the point that Mary raised there, where she talked about as long as my children are young, I've cut back on all these kinds of things. I mean, not all of you, were at that point when you joined the firm, but for those of you who were, was that a correct assessment that while the kids were young, you pulled back on things, and then as they got older, you began to get more involved? Is that accurate?
That's certainly accurate for me.
And the firm gave you that freedom to be able to do that?
Well, not only did they give me the freedom to be able to do it, many of us were really at the same stage, so it was a like-minded approach, and I think we would spend as much time discussing our children, our nannies, how we were going to get kids from A to B as we did our cases.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then the array of maternity court robes in the back wall, on the back wall there. Right? The other thing, of course, that I recall so well was the little guy who would deliver the toilet paper on a regular basis, quite loads and loads of toilet paper, and he'd walk down the long hallway leading to the bathroom at the back with this look on his eye, like, how are they ordering this much toilet paper? And he'd look in the offices as he went. And finally, by the time he got to the back, he figured it out. Because until you hired Dave, there were no men at all.
Just because you mentioned David, I think I should also mention that we have staff members who've been there the whole time. Lois, who came with Harriet and you, is still at the firm. David's been with us since 90 or 89.
He was there just after. I think Dave came just after I left.
She was there when
Marion
I
was
came.
there
when I came.
Yeah.
He was already there when I was there.
She's still there.
She came back.
Oh, she came back.
Yes.
You see, you can never leave. That's the thing. It's golden handcuff. You can never leave. So, are there any drawbacks to the firm structure? Anything that you would do differently? Anything that you think is a problem?
No, is the short answer. No.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Has it kept you in the practice of law when you might have otherwise left?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so talk about what did the firm do for you?
No, it had nothing to do with the firm. I had wanted to be a teacher since I was, young, and the timing worked very well for the different changes that were happening in my life. So when we came back from London, I didn't return. Although Judy's practice was available, I got off the plane after having lived in London for 2 years and left this firm to go there. And Judy phoned the day I got home and said I was just made a judge. Do you want my practice? And we were still jet lagged, and I had a little tiny kid at that point. I just had another baby, and we had just moved countries, and it was too soon. And then circumstances sort of intervened to make coming back not make any sense. But it wasn't. I think if it would have been a harder transition if I hadn't had the feeling that I always had from this group of women, which was you make decisions that work for your life. And I would have been much more prone to being plagued with self-doubt, and I think it would have been a much more acute decision going from a Bay Street firm to becoming a teacher than it was. And no one here really skipped a beat. I mean, they kept very nicely saying, well, we have an office. I mean, you've changed your mind for years. And somehow I still managed to get to the retreat almost every year. But I think that supportiveness and that sense that I was still part of the community, even though I had made a decision that made sense for me, for who I am, that made a big difference. It made it easier.
Mm-hmm. Deborah, you left too, right?
I did, but I moved to New York, and then ended up doing entertainment law. But definitely, if I ever practiced law again, I would go back to Dickson Sachs. I mean, it was the best experience of my life.
Yeah, I'd do the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I came from a big firm where I did the same thing. I put my jacket on the back of my chair and pretend I was still there and sneak out at night. And at Dickson Sachs, you guys used to turn off the fax machine at 5 o'clock. And I was like, how are my clients going to fax me? Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they did. Can't turn off the internet, though.
And then you'd turn it on in the morning, and it was that round paper, and it would come flying out onto the floor. So the firm has always primarily been family, estate, some entertainment. Did people fall into the practice area? Did you choose it intentionally? Why do you think you gravitated to family law, to estates, to some of the other areas when you started? For some of you who started early on. Harriet, Cheryl, Marion?
I think there were two things. First of all, there was, when Cheryl and I started practicing, there was it was a period of big reform in family law, and there were a number, as women lawyers, we were called upon to, I can remember going and speaking to legislative committees. I'd been called to the bar about 2 seconds about what they should be doing in terms of family law, and we were asked to speak at groups, and so as a result of that, those were the clients. Gradually, I did everything at the beginning, but gradually, partly because of the profile that I developed as a result of that, and I was interested because there was so much going on and there was so much work that needed to be done. The practice became that, and the more you do it, that's where you get your reputation. And I liked it because it was working with people, and that's always been something that's attracted me to the practice. That's the part of practicing law that I like, is working with people.
Cheryl, same for you?
More or less, yes. But I think at the time there was I think it was a recession when we got out of bar ads. There weren't a lot of other opportunities. Not that I really wanted to ever work in a big firm, but and I think if you hung out a shingle as a practitioner, you were more that was the kind of work that was more likely to come. That was the reality of it. It was either small business or family. Other cases were going to the larger firms. So I think that was part of it, but part of it was that it was exciting and it was changing and it never boring. And I have to say that's still true, right? It just and I think that's true. It seems to me of what I can tell from my colleagues' estate practices too. These are very interesting because they're people centered. So
and you started to specialize too. You started to move towards the adoption area.
Right.
How did you do that? Why?
Well, it was kind of related because I did children's lawyer work and I did child protection work, and so it was sort of related. But I mean, it all started with one case. It was someone in my law school class who called and said he and his wife were hoping to adopt a child, and there was a physician who knew of somebody who wanted to place her child with them, and he said, could I do this? And I said, I've never done it before. I really have no idea. I imagine there's all kinds of rules that I don't know. And he said, well, I trust you to learn. And I found out who was doing it, and I did learn, and I did that one case. And it was ironic because at the time, adoptive parents were not allowed in hospitals. And so I had to go to the hospital to get the baby and bring the baby to their home. It was my husband and Jeff and I that did that. And when I got to his home, he came out, and I was about to take the baby out of the car to give the baby to him, a car seat, and he didn't trust me. Anyway, he didn't want me to do it. And I said, you trusted me to figure out how to do this thing that I'd never done before, but you won't trust me to hold this thing. Anyway, so it kind of took off from there. But the nice thing was that I've stayed in the same place. I kind of feel part of the furniture, right? So I've been there but I was able to change the nature of my practice, and it's still within the rubric of family law, but it's changed significantly.
Yeah. Marion, how did you?
Well, my practice was somewhat different because I'd been the first lawyer and executive director of Justice for Children. So I had been there for 3.5 years before I went into private practice. And so when I started my practice, I got a lot of referrals that came out of that experience. So I worked for the children's lawyer. I was also doing special education litigation. Supreme Court of Canada decision recently, like this week, is just so wonderful. We worked on special education rights in that period. I had been working for the Metro Chairman's Special Committee on Child Abuse and developed the protocol for the investigation and prosecution of child sexual abuse cases. And then I also worked I just had these retainers. In that period, there seemed to be work available to lawyers who were interested in a policy practice. So I had probably 60% of my practice was a policy practice. And I did work for the Provincial Judges Family Law Rules Committee, and did work for the Ontario Advisory Committee on Women's Issues, and a whole lot of things in areas that I had done work on at Justice for Children. So that became, I was able to pursue my own kind of practice in this collegial firm. And I did family, and basically my family practice was about 30 or 40% of the practice. So it was an unusual period. It was a nice opportunity to do that.
I mean, as people have gone and others have come, other than the sort of entertainment law few that came in, has virtually everybody who's wanted to come in been either a family lawyer or an estates lawyer? Have there been others who've been interested and that have not come? So the firm being identified the way it is has now attracting that kind of practitioner as well. And what about marketing? I mean, I was looking at some of those wonderful ads that were done. I can't remember what year they are. They're back in the, well, first of all, there's the peanut butter on the will. January 26th, 1987. And there you all are. How the Peanut Butter Got on the Will. So that one, I think that one attracted a huge amount of attention. And that the Haynes thing comes at about the same time. But I'm interested in the ads. There's the Peanut Butter on the Will picture. But I'm interested in some of the marketing. So, for example, the ads which said...
I love that one you're holding up.
Yeah, well, that was when Harriet was running for venture. She doesn't look like a pit bull. Funny, she doesn't look like a pit bull. So there's that one. There's the ads which say, we'll manage your affairs when your partner is having one, which I love. And another in reference to separation proceedings, your neighbors will thank us.
That was because we had the opportunity from Jen's stepson, who was an advertising guy, to give us some free ideas. And I think those ads did go into some community papers. I don't think anybody ever got one referral from any marketing thing we ever did. I mean, most of our referrals
I think I
come
got
from
elected venture, though, on the basis
Yes,
of
yes.
that.
I think there were other things you may have done in your lifetime. But I think that basically our referral base comes from our reputations, not our marketing. We've always been very low-key. Marketing has come to us. We haven't gone to market.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting, the third one was leave it to us, we do wills.
Yeah. Do you have any more than 3 of those?
It looks like, from what whoever gave me this stuff, I think it may have been you, Sharon, who gave it to me. I think it was just the 3. And did they run for?
We have more.
You have more?
There were some we didn't use.
Yeah.
There were tons of ideas. And
They
we
were
didn't use them
hilarious,
all.
but we didn't use them.
But I
Did we
mean,
use any of them?
And Mary Louise, when she was running for venture, I ran an ad that said, "Hell on wheels."
so I mean, if marketing in the sense of having to do these kinds of things wasn't necessary beyond those first, at the beginning, those interviews and things were because you were so novel. It was such an unusual thing. But the coming to you of clients has come primarily from referral of other clients, but also just from others in the profession who see an all-woman firm and they want to refer somebody to an all-woman firm? Or is it your individual reputations that have done it?
I think it's a firm that's noted to have high-quality legal services, whether we're female or not.
Yeah.
And I think we have a reputation of being reasonable, settlement-oriented, and fun, I hope.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I tend to get a lot of work from some of my former colleagues, some of whom I didn't even think knew me at the big firm that I was at. I get calls from people and I'm like, did you know me? You never said hello to me. You never acknowledged me in any way, and suddenly you're referring your daughter to me or whatever. So I always find that quite interesting. But I think for me, when I left the large firm that I was at, there was effectively no more family law lawyers there. So I think now at the big firms, most people don't know a family law lawyer, so they say, you know, if they're asking around or calling around in those contexts, I get a lot of work from there, which is, you know, really very kind considering.
I mean, I think it's quite true, isn't it, that most of the big firms have just put an end to their family departments.
When I was at a big firm, and they had just merged with a small family law firm, and when I was in about my second year, they said, I was in the litigation department, but they said, if you want to practice family law, you'll never be a partner here. So, and then I think eventually that all the family partners were gone from that firm.
And what about estates? Same thing? I mean, are the big, I mean, leaving aside large estate litigation, which the big firms still do, for smaller matters, is that the same thing the firms have kind of moved away from?
I think what's happening in the estates bar is that it's a very old bar, and there are not that many young people up and coming in small firms, big firms, anywhere. There are some, of course, but not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for the most part, the large firms, with I think just a couple of exceptions, I think the large firms, it's a matter of time as the partners who practice in that area retire or die. I don't think there's a lot of younger lawyers in the warm-up pen coming forward. And I think it's partly a matter of cost, and partly that I think the perception that the estate's practice is not compatible with the very business-driven profile of the firm.
Yeah.
I've been surprised at the referrals I've got from the big firms. I'm dealing right now with a former managing partner of McCarthy's who sent me work through the years. Estates work.
Yeah. So, over the years, people have come, people have gone, but you've stayed at 8 or 9. Why hasn't the firm gotten bigger? Have you chosen not to get bigger, and if so, why? Because it was interesting, there's a bit in there that I didn't play. I think it's you, Marion, who's talking about we're getting a lot of work. So we have two choices. One is to expand our size to be able to take it on, or the other is to turn it away. And it was not clear at that point what the route would be, but clearly the way it's worked is somebody leaves and you recruit somebody to replace that person. You don't go any bigger than that. So why, or why
Have you
not?
ever tried to decorate an office with 9 women? More than that would be unthinkable, and I think we value the friendships that emerge. I mean, we travel together, we go out for dinner, we go to theater, we enjoy each other's company, we go to Shaw, we do things together that if it got bigger, we wouldn't have that special connection. And people who leave stay with us in their own way.
I think it's also just a function of kind of not inertia, but physically there's only space for 9 lawyers.
That's
and
right.
we like
And
our
the last
space.
time, again, God
so
help
the
us.
choice is, do we get new space? And a little while ago we floated with the idea of moving, and it was probably the most depressing exercise.
Cheryl had to go and lie down.
So having looked at what was out there, we just said, we're not moving. We're going to renew our lease, we're staying, and that is, the limitation is there are only 9 offices, so there are only going to be 9 of us.
I think the other thing is, if you consider the model, there's really no real incentive for us to expand. It doesn't make it any different to us. I mean, the more people, the greater the expenses. So it's not that you know, there's not a financial incentive to grow.
The other thing is, I don't get the sense that people, what surprises me is, it's not just that people don't choose the model in terms of practicing in association, but it surprises me that more, given what is known about how difficult it is to survive in the profession as a woman, and how really in some ways that's gotten worse, not better, how few women seem to be emulating what we did.
It's extraordinary.
And,
It is extraordinary.
Yeah, and so it's not like, at least my sense when I was there, towards the end, it wasn't like there were millions of women beating down on our doors saying, please, 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 expand, expand, expand. That's not what happens. And it's not what most law students, when I talk to them about what I did, and I think we've all done that because we're still seen as being a very unusual choice, and one gets the sense that they find it an interesting experiment, but not one that they're the least bit attracted to.
You know, Harriet, I think there's a backlash about being a feminist in the next generation. Probably not for our children, but I think generally speaking, there's.
But
I'm not a feminist, but.
But it's not even whether you're. I mean, I think in some ways the choice. Speaking from my own experience, while my choice was initially very politically driven, it became much more lifestyle driven as time went on, and that lifestyle reality is one that women lawyers complain about non-stop, and it drives them from the profession. And so I don't get the sense, you don't have to be you don't have to self-identify. That was as a feminist to make that choice.
But you know what?
But you do hear that from the next generation.
But I think the success of the firm is in part gender, but it's also personality, because when I joined the firm and I was, my husband thought I was on drugs for the first while. I was so happy. And I said, you have no idea how wonderful it is to be practicing with 8 other women. And he said, yes, imagine these 8 women, and he rhymed off 8 of my former partners. He said, imagine practicing in a firm with them. You'd shoot yourself. So I think it's not just gender.
No, it's true, because Yola's experience would reinforce that. She went from us to a small firm where she's the only woman.
Yeah.
And
So
she's
it's,
still
you know, I
feeling
think
the same sense
the
of
lunch
support.
test is self-selecting in the sense that, you know, you can't just join the firm because you happen to be the right gender.
Yeah.
You have to fit in well
Yeah.
with the other 8 people
that's
to
right.
be invited into the firm.
Well, I mean, it's been a kind of a natural evolution. People come, people go, and it's sort of, they've done it for whatever reasons, but it's almost seemed to be seamless in the way it's happened. And I remember there was one point where you were having a little trouble filling the space. I can't remember what year that was, and there were other reasons, and people were angsting about it. But eventually, it's just seemed to flow from that. And in some ways, it seems as if you've done it by referral. Somebody calls you up and says, I heard you've got an empty office, right? So in some ways, it seems like it has its own box, that there's room for 9, and yet, and the people have come and gone in that kind of seamless sort of a way. So
I think also the prospect of taking on the overhead is daunting to a lot of people who worked in firms and had all of that business taken care of. And if they haven't reached a stage that they're confident in their ability to handle it or to organize their practice, I think it's just too much, maybe.
It takes self-confidence.
It does.
And a certain risk-taking.
Yeah.
Self-confidence and credit.
No, but that was the point, one of the points I was trying to make earlier when people were talking about, you know, why more people don't choose this and why instead would they choose to go to a firm. And it does come down to that, because they are more comfortable in an environment where the work will be provided and all these extraneous issues will be taken care of. Whereas, you know, at Dickson, you create your own practice and you again are responsible for the overhead, and you have to be mindful of that. So I think you guys are, you know, bang on with those comments. I think that's a big part of it.
Is it now, you know, when the firm started, there were a lot of you with very young kids or not yet having your kids and just about to have your kids, and that's less the pattern now. It's grandchildren. And I'm just thinking, is it also what's happening is that younger women are more reluctant to try it, and because as you've been recruiting, I mean, you've got younger calls, but a lot of them are second careers. I don't know about the 2 who didn't come. Nicole, is it Nicole? I don't know either of them. Just behind you on the desk there are the Michelle and who was the other one?
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
She's been in practice.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, because it's no longer got that look of the peanut butter on the wheel anymore. And I'm wondering whether that's either what you're looking for when you recruit somebody, or whether it's just that there are fewer younger women who are prepared to do what you did as young lawyers. I mean, when you get the calls, are you thinking about that when you're recruiting? Are you looking for people who are more or less at a stage in their career that you're not going to have to worry about them?
We're looking for a fit,
a
personal fit. But we are looking for younger people. It's Mary and I and Mary Louise. You know, we certainly are maturing and graying, and as part of our succession
succession
planning for our practice, we realize you need younger lawyers to come in. And in fact, we almost considered move to go to more of the bar events, because, you know, when you just hang out with people of your own age, you're not going to meet the new people. And I think that is a problem. But the problem also is from a financial model. Finding, you know, you need a younger person who has a practice or enough confidence that they can make it on their own, that you would be confident turning your clients or practice over to. And that's, you know, that's a tough thing.
Also, my students come out of school with an enormous amount of debt. You know, I don't know, I certainly wasn't in the same, you know, financial debt position when I finished law school. I don't know that I would have started even hanging my own shingle in an organization like this, because I may not have had the confidence to do it as a younger lawyer. But I do think that students coming out of school now have a much higher financial burden. And so to look at that along with starting somewhere where they're going to have no workflow and no guaranteed anything and no referrals or name that somebody would call and say, yes, here's some work, I think that is daunting to come into a place like us and say, here's the check you have to write every month, along with all of the other expenses that you have. So I think that may be part of it as well. It's a different time now for students coming out of law school than it was historically.
Hello. Hi, Judy. Sorry. Are you there?
I am, but I have to leave you. I've been so enjoying this that I can't be there with you all.
I know. We missed you. But thank you for being patient on the phone.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Judy. Bye.
Bye, Judy.
I mean, does it worry you, the succession idea, that you'll retire and there won't be? Do you think about it, or do you think it's not a problem that you will always be able to find people to come and take the space?
It's not really a question of the space. We're leaving behind.
I know.
Very sophisticated legal work.
Yeah, I know.
And, your average newcomer cannot do that.
Yeah.
Can't take over.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Because that's one of the dilemmas that we're having with sole and small practice generally, is that people just shut the door. They just say, okay, I'll see if I can find somebody to take your file, but I'll finish up as much as I can, and then I close the door. My practice isn't worth anything, and I can't hang around waiting for somebody to come. And this is such a unique entity that I wonder if you've thought about that as you're starting to,
Try not to worry about it.
Pardon me? You try not to worry about it. Okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I didn't want to make you worry about it more.
Yeah, but we do worry about it.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of women that I went to law school with that still are working remarkably. They've lasted and they're at big firms still. I hear them worrying now that they will be forced to retire, and they're not ready to. And so in another, they're worrying about retirement plans. And I say, oh, well, at our firm, people could stay. It would be antithetical to our practice to say you have to go at a certain age. Maybe it's not a benefit, but it is part of the freedom that we have. Maybe some of those women leaving firms at age 60 will be looking for an arrangement like ours, where they do have financial stability and want to finish their career in a place that
And I think
they
I
feel
think
they belong.
I think for women who are winding down, the financial model doesn't work for them. It's you need a pretty robust practice to the security of knowing you've got that practice to meet that monthly overhead.
Yeah.
But it's ironic because the people who are choosing to be in firms or in-house, I don't know what you have all heard, but there's so many who are cutting back and writing, golden handcuff checks and all kinds of things, and forcing people either into early retirement, as Shireen just said, or to go seek other employment. And it is such an oxymoron, because one of the main reasons a lot of these people chose to be in big firms is because they had this sense of security. And now they're being forced out because other people are in control.
Calling the shot.
Even as partners.
Yes.
Yes, partners.
Yeah, most of those
And they
partners.
make them retire. when
Yeah, they
they're
do.
60.
65.
And that will affect women more than men, because they have a longer career ahead of them after forced early retirement.
They do.
I mean, you folks have never had an articling student, but have you had? Or when? I missed it.
Well, Marie Nickel was actually a legal assistant and who went to law school. And we told her if she went to law school and was successful, she could article with us. And she,
Who was the principal? Jen, you were?
Jen.
Yeah?
So we did have one.
Yeah.
And
how
when
did
we
you-
first started, Irene Shapiro came.
Right. How did you deal with her salary when she was an artist? Did you all just divvy it up? Do you remember?
What year was it,
Yes,
Cheryl?
we did. I was after fee for service. She worked with fee for service. Whoever used her paid her hourly.
Right. She would bill us, I guess.
Even as an articling student.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. Maybe we just divided it up. I don't remember how we paid her.
So,
We did, though.
but clearly, I mean, you all are really interested in with the younger generation of women who have practiced. So I'm just wondering, in terms of mentoring or what you've done over your careers, how have you talked, encouraged other young female lawyers in their sort of aspirations and goals, if you have?
We get a lot of people who want to come and talk to us that are just out of law school or looking for work, and we'll guide them and help them, and you know, we don't have anything at our firm.
Right.
We'll tell them, you know, do this and do that, and go to these meetings and get yourself known and volunteer to speak.
Yeah.
You know, all those the usual sort of stuff, and you know, and give them as much time as possible, and maybe take them around the firm and introduce them to people. But that's about all. That's all I do anyway.
Positions in terms of, you know, RMIS, where will I be safe?
Right. Right.
I have a lot of students who, because I was at a big firm, and in fact I articled with Kathy Aitken, Justice Aitken, and Shirley Greenberg, and Terry Kirk, and Helena Orton, so I really have gone from one great spot of all women to another great spot of all women, and then I had that sort of 10-year, you know, period, black period in between. But no, I shouldn't say that. I really have to say I enjoyed my time at the big firm. Everyone in my department was very kind to me, so I shouldn't really diss them. The rest of the firm was kind of nasty to quite honest. But what I find, and I think, Connie, probably you find this as well with students, is that they, particularly women, they do have questions about, you know, how to go about their practice, where to sort of start, are there job opportunities here, how will the working environment be, will I be accepted? And you do try. I have students who don't take my classes, but they still seek me out, either by email or to come and see me when I'm at U of O, just to ask me those very kinds of questions and say, well, what did you do and how did you plan? And I'm a bad example, because every job I've ever had I fell into completely by luck and by chance and by accident, so I had no plan. But I say to them, you know, people have plans. They make these plans and apparently they work and think about a plan. But we do. I think all of us who do that, you know, sort of try to, and the work I do at LEAF, you know, with younger lawyers who are on various committees and who do volunteer work, you know, they have questions, and I think we can sort of help direct them and give them some ideas through the experiences that we've had, and try and focus them and help them sort of make a plan for themselves.
Have the issues for women changed? Over the years you've been talking to women, have they changed? Sharon's saying no.
Well, worse, because they have student loan debts.
Yeah.
So they feel trapped in not having the choice to start out on their own.
I think it's changed in a funny way. When Jill and I graduated, there were probably 50% women in law school in 1986. And in fact, they were actively hiring women because their numbers were low. So the big firms were begging you to go. And so they hired all these women, but there are no women partners. I mean, they have the same problem. They had all the women come in, and at about year 5, all the women left because there wasn't a way to make it work, that you could work those hours, sustain those hours, have a relationship, have children, have a life outside of law. So it does worry me now that there's still 50% of women in law school and they're not becoming partners at the big firms.
Yeah. Well, and they're leaving in droves. I mean,
Yeah. And I mean, in my generation, there were a lot of women who tried, you know, job sharing, you know, various different options, but nothing seemed to work, and I don't know what the solution is.
But I mean, it is a conundrum because, you know, as you said, you've got that over here and you've got this model and it's not being taken up. I mean, when I went to our database to see how many female law firms there are in the province, there are about 150 something. The lion's share of them are 2 women practicing together. There's a few of 3, 4, and 5, and there's 1 with 9. And that's it. That is it. And I mean, I don't know about the rest of the country, but I doubt that you've got anything as big as 9. But when you think that 9 is as big as it gets, and you've been at 9 since 1986, it does say something. And I think Harriet's right. You have to ask yourself, what is it that stops women from wanting to do this together when they're so discontent in the model that exists and seemingly getting more discontent as the pressures on big firms and what the firms expect of them grow? That model is broken. And
But part of it, could it be that family law is something that's easy to practice in a small firm, and a lot of other practices might not work well in a small firm? And so if you don't want to practice family or estates, it's more difficult.
Although, you've got boutique litigation firms, and none of them is an all-female firm.
Yeah, and
A lot of boutique litigation firms, the firms that are the people who've left the big firms and they've created niche partnerships and whatever, but they're not all women.
Litigation requires you to maybe have not much of a life.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a serious litigator, you have to be available on call almost all the time. It's very stressful life, I think.
But you're right, there are other areas where, like intellectual property, that's much more, a contained hours practice, securities, environmental law, a lot of that is, pretty self-contained, where you don't need to be in a large law firm, and there are none.
Yeah. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit, because now you've been in practice a long time, some of you. And one of the things that we did when we started the small firm roundtables with people who were at a point in their careers where they were either thinking about retiring or close to retiring, was to talk about what it is to practice law in small firms and how it's changed. Because in fact, we have nobody talks about that. We don't know a lot about what is it that's changed in the physical, actual practicing of law, from the technology to the overheads to all of that stuff. So for some of you, Mary Louise, you've been doing this for a lot of years. First of all, in terms of just the actual practicing of law, what have been the things that you've hated about the changes, and what has been really good in terms of changes that have happened since you started? And some of you obviously are not as long out as others, but in terms of the actual practice of law and its ease or technology or whatever.
Well, Harriet was saying when she opened her firm that they wanted to have a good library. That must have been a huge expense, and I can't imagine anybody has a library anymore. Do you still have a library?
We just had that discussion.
Do you need a library?
It's a fake.
Yeah, what do you have
Part of the interior decorating.
You've stopped ordering anything? Do you order anything at all?
Review that.
Oh, okay. After that you do the partnership agreement.
The Great Library is not ordering any more books, I heard the other day.
The Great Library is empty most of the time. Nobody's in there.
Wow.
But we'll keep it
People expect instantaneous responses. They think you're sitting in front of a computer and you're going to answer an email right away. And as people who know me know, that's not going to happen in my practice.
Until we have an intervention, Sharon.
It crept up on me. Yes, I adapted as it went along to the computer.
So in terms of that, the sort of instantaneous demand for answers, what has that done to your own sense of satisfaction with the practice?
I think it means that we don't stop practicing in the evenings and on the weekends, or a lot of us don't. That have access with our Blackberries, or we're in the office one day or 2 days on the weekends, or late at night and things like that.
Okay, so you're saying that, and you're saying, are you
Some of us make different choices, and I can tell you, it's a choice. It's a choice.
But I think it also gives you more freedom, because I take far more vacation time than I ever did 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and I know that I can go online, I can check emails. If I have to answer something, I will, and it might be 10 minutes out of my day, but I'm 6 or 8 weeks out of the year I'm taking holidays.
But
and
is
I'm
that a
only
holiday?
answering.
Right? I think that's the other end of it.
We're blurring the lines between work
it's become much more murky. It really is. I know what you mean, and yes, you can go away and you can walk into any Starbucks in the world and open up an iPad or your iPhone or whatever and find out what latest crisis, had you been there, you could deal with in one day. So then you end up spending, I don't know how much time contacting your assistant to deal with it. And, I'm sure just about everybody but Sharon has been in that situation where you've been away and, but for your trusty computer, You might actually have a holiday.
Been in a situation, that's why I don't do it anymore. Yeah. Been in that situation. You can do it. In the old days, I remember once I rented a cottage for 2 weeks. I was on the phone every minute trying to deal with the case. I packed up, went home and said, it was a nice cottage, too bad I wasn't here. Yeah. Not doing that again.
So does everybody have a BlackBerry?
No.
Way to go, way to go.
iPhone.
iPhone.
I have a very important question.
Yes.
Now, if you're in law school and everybody is online doing their research, where do people go to flirt?
Well, and also
online. That was nice when you go to the library.
They're on Facebook.
They do it online.
They do it online.
They do it online.
They have
That's
relationships
also the
online.
downside of an all-female firm. I married my husband, I met him at a big firm.
Somebody's my.
So what else? The sort of speeding up to some degree, the technology.
To me, what's been interesting, because we have the website hamiltonlawyers.ca, and I've had clients from Australia, from the States, and they just find you online, and some interesting work has come out of it. Who would have guessed?
Yeah.
So, there you go.
Do you get people just clicking on and finding you that way? A lot of work that way at the firm? I mean, your website is, you know, pretty basic. That's not an editorial comment, it's just a basic.
Very kind.
It's very.
So you obviously have not, you know, you're not trying to market yourself that way because, I mean, are you all just, you're basically happy with the amount of work you're getting for what you want? Is that more or less right? Or are you feeling like you need more work?
Well, I think we're all acknowledging we have to do something about our website. That's acknowledged. But I think we don't use it as a promotion tool, and don't expect someone to come off the street, so to speak, to the website. But what we do recognize is that people will verify information on that site. So if there's a referral from someone, they're going to check us out there.
Yeah.
I think that's really the main purpose of it for us.
Would you hire somebody to work on the site with you?
Yeah, we would.
Oh, they sound so, don't they sound
We've got decorating an office.
We've got
Yeah,
Jane
it's
on
like
the
decorating an office versus decorating a website.
It's not on fire, so it hasn't become a priority.
I have here minutes from one of your meetings. I got to read this, okay? This is just wonderful. This tells you everything about the firm. Association meeting, January the 12th, 1987.
minutes. We don't do
Yola's rent, okay? It was agreed that Yola should pay $125 less per month than the others to adjust for the fact that she has an office without windows. Marion's computer. It was agreed that Marion's computer expenses would be billed through the association, and that the association will pay Resna to put the family law precedents and the will precedents, if they've not already been put on, to Marion's computer, and that Resna would be paid by the association for training the other secretaries on how to use Marion's computer. Wow. They're wonderful. They're wonderful, you know, deep minutes. Association sign. It was agreed to wait and see what Brian McGee did with respect to the sign before making a decision about it. Trust account. At this point, there is to be no merger of trust accounts. There you go, right? Solicitors' advertising costs, agreed that each solicitor would pay their own advertising costs and that this should be removed from the January budget. So pretty much, you know, a reception phone, it was agreed that at this point, such an expense could not be afforded. For a reception phone, that's January 1987. Open
for
house.
clients to use.
For clients to use, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Open house, the tentative date was set for April the 2nd, 1987.
We're good at that.
Yola, you'll be interested to hear that there was, with respect to moving costs, it was agreed there would be no adjustment for Yola with respect to the moving costs. And that this cost would be just divided evenly 8 ways.
Yep.
So
right.
there you are. I mean, it's they're wonderful, wonderful minutes, and you've got the letters of for your lease on this as well. So, so in terms of other than the website, are there any other changes that you've thought about doing to the firm, to thinking about the future, anything like that? You're pretty well all happy with the way it's going. You can say it. It's good. I think you are. Right? Okay. there anything else anybody wanted to add? We're ending a little early, but it's been a long day for all of you, and I don't want to tire you out. Anything else?
I just have one question.
Yes.
Over the course of history, at different points in time, people have shared offices. Like we've had several people come at different times, and particularly young people, and they've shared the offices, say, 2.5 days a week and so forth. And were those successful or not successful? I just wondered why they didn't work, if they didn't work, or was, is there any evaluation of that?
Deb and I shared an office, and I think it was really successful.
I actually only vaguely remember doing that. I know we shared secretaries, and you always fired them, and I didn't.
Yeah, but
we would hire secretaries who couldn't type.
We did share space for some time.
We did.
And I remember thinking, thank God. And I don't remember who left first.
I have no idea. I have no
I know I was there lightning speed.
Was it on Birch?
No.
I was only ever on Alpha.
It must have been when I was in process of moving to New York and you were in the process of moving in.
It was half.
No, I thought I was there before you, and then
It was babies.
Yeah, I shared after my husband and baby came back.
When did you leave for New York?
From a maternity leave.
1991.
Who did you share with, Sharon?
And I left at
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I shared with somebody that then went on their own maternity leave, her own maternity leave, and then went on to run an articling program for a big firm.
Stacey, who wanted to be here and at the last minute had something else come up and couldn't.
I think
I thought that part was,
it worked fine.
but it had
brilliant
to be
idea.
a nice coincidence that your needs meshed, and I guess for us, can either of us?
I think that
it worked.
I think it's just difficult it was, at least when I was on a maternity leave and coming back, it was difficult to work part-time at home. And maybe technology would help that now, because I just found like having to have all the files, and I didn't know which ones while I was at home would erupt. So it was, I found it really tricky. I also found maternity leaves back then that weren't paid if you were a sole practitioner and you had to carry expenses and your insurance and try to take a decent amount of time. I found it almost impossible, but luckily with that shared arrangement and the firm that I was with, thank goodness I made it through that tough time.
I just remember talking about that. I remember there was a time when it was Jennifer, I think. Jennifer was pregnant and so was her assistant. And it was just this weird thing because her assistant was able to get employment insurance for the time she was off. Jennifer, on the other hand, had to cover everything for that time.
But there have been changes.
Yes, I understand there are now changes.
I think the difficulty with sharing is that the lawyers who are sharing have to have a pretty realistic assessment of how much time they're going to need in the office, and I think it's hard to gauge that. Also, I think you got to have the same level of neatness, and also you have a problem in terms of filing cabinet space, because each of you has need for a full lawyer's practice filing cabinet space. And if you remember anything about the firm, one of the negatives is the lack of enough filing cabinets. So all of a sudden you've got 10 bodies where there's only enough filing space for probably 8 people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think all those issues could be overcome, though, when you look at the benefits of doing it. For me, if I hadn't been able to do that, I probably wouldn't be still in practice at the firm. So, weighing out those inconveniences versus what it allowed me in the long run was huge.
No, and you know what, I think the one thing about the firm is the incredible level of goodwill to make it work for you and to accommodate and to let you hotel in their offices and stuff like that. I think that's one of the real strengths of the firm, is how everybody pulls together to accommodate your needs.
Well, certainly my memory was that maternity leaves were just, okay, we'll take over yours while you're gone, because probably you're going to be taking over mine, a year later. And illnesses and all of those things were just accepted as being part of the process. And I mean, on that, my memory is, and I'm sure for everybody else who left, it was a pretty seamless process to give your practice over to somebody else. The clients did not, we must have done it in a particular way, because the clients did not seem overly crazed at the notion that you were gone and somebody else was going to take over your practice. So when I left, Marion, you took over my practice, and Jan, you took some of my practice too, I think.
Yeah.
And is that, I mean, has that all been your experience generally, that you've managed to manage expectations on behalf of the clients when you've left, the people who've left, so that it wasn't a problem?
Well, 4 times people were appointed, and
Yeah.
so there was
no choice.
No
Right?
choice.
That's
There
right.
was nothing they could do.
That's right.
And it was instantaneous. They had
That's
to
right,
get
yeah.
right off the file.
Yeah, that's right.
But for Jennifer Fredson, I think, and I think probably everyone else who left did this, is, I mean, she was very good about the way she made the handover. She wrote to all her clients. She said,
Yeah.
you know, I'm leaving, I'm going to Winnipeg, and these are the people who are, you should
Yeah.
contact, and gave full contact information.
Yeah.
And access to all her files, so it was great.
Anything else anybody wanted to raise or discuss?
I think the other thing we probably have to acknowledge is the retreat.
Yes, I was just going to, I had that down as a question. What has been the role of the retreat in the longevity of the, not only the firm, but the associations?
Well, of keeping everyone together, no matter, you know, when they were there. It's just so, or for how brief a time. Yeah. It's just the most delightful.
For posterity, the retreat, I'm saying this for the
Yeah.
record.
Yes.
The retreat is what, 2 days? It's 2 days in June at Harriet's. It's always been at Harriet's, hasn't it, from the very beginning?
Cottage. It has since 1987.
At Harriet and Clay's place, and everybody gets the invitation. Everybody brings food. Everybody comes or goes as they choose.
All works, and it's all delightful and sustaining. It's just.
I was wondering if that was one of the reasons why the firm size had stuck to 9. 'Cause there's only so many bedrooms at Hayden Ferry.
We can manage.
I
Or
was
for
so
14
anxious
bedrooms.
for the first retreat because I had been and the retreats were awful. You know, people were questioned about their billings and questioned about their work and blah blah. And I said to Mary Louise, I'm so anxious about going to this, and she laughed at it. And I've been laughing ever since.
But you might, I just might note that the first retreat had an actual purpose, and that was for us to all get away to be able to look at the creation of a partnership.
That's right. Honest to God, it's true. And there was a little group of us that had to go away and draft something.
We drafted
that's why
something.
I've got it
Yes,
somewhere.
yeah,
and I
we
can't
did
remember
draft
who else. I
something.
think, Cheryl, you were.
Yeah, I was
you
in there,
I
and I think we had a discussion for about 10 minutes.
It was raining. That was the only reason we discussed it, because it was raining and we couldn't
Missed
go
it all,
out.
and then went to, you know, the wine and the everything else, the food, the gossip, whatever. So I don't know that we ever tried again.
There's no partnership agreement, there's no minutes to meetings, and there's no memos, as Helen used to call them. What I can say about the seamless transitions, we always land on our feet. We always get people who we love, and every time someone leaves, it's awful.
It's wrenching.
Awful. And when I found out, like many years later, that Jill had only been my law associate in those days for 6 months, I was completely grief-stricken when she left. And as Jill says, she's spent more time at the retreat than she has at the firm.
It's true.
Well, and I had forgotten about the lunch test, so I think Cheryl or somebody should discuss the lunch test, which is brilliant.
I think you better not bring that up. It doesn't exist anymore. People don't eat.
But now you've said it, you've got to bring it up. Somebody has to explain the lunch
it's
test.
how we pick new partners is who would you like to have lunch with every day. That's the criteria.
Yeah.
I mean, after certain standards have been
certain competency standards have been met.
If they've been called to bar.
Well, thank you all so much for doing this. When this was really Jan and Marion who started this discussion with me about that you guys wanted to do something to commemorate the 25 years. Originally, you were going to write something, but we never got around to the writing. Constance is going to put her plug in, but really it was Jan and Marion who kind of pushed this, and then serendipitously we were doing this project, so we were able to do it. So from that perspective, I'm just going to hand it over to Constance, who's clearly got something she wants to say.
Well, so this is a plea. I think you should write a firm biography. I really do. This is so special and so important. And as you've indicated, it's a wonderful model. that a lot of people don't know about and that hasn't been replicated. And if you don't write a firm biography, it will disappear. And it's not so hard. Each of you could do, you know, a little bit of a memoir and reflections and anecdotes. And one or two people could take the job of being editor and making sure that everybody puts their piece in. It does not have to be a polished academic treatise or even a, you know, a journalistic free-for-all. It can be just your own memoirs. And you could either self-publish it, which is not so hard these days, and if anybody would like advice on how to do that, I can help. Or you could just file it with the Law Society archives, which means it will go down along with the video into history about your contribution and the way in which you practiced and the very, very amazing relationships that you forged amongst yourself in the practice of law. And I think, so this is a plea. Think seriously about doing this.
Could it also be coupled with the cookbook that Marion Lane always threatens to? Absolutely. Because part of the retreat, yes, combined, part of the retreat is also the recipes, because people bring fabulous stuff year to year, and then we always go back and say, who made that? How do you make that? So perhaps that could
Chapter
also...
1 is the recipe followed by the memoir. Chapter 2, I think this would be very good.
And then you could have a chapter on interior decorating. And some photographs. Because as I sat here, I was wondering what those rooms look like.
Well, in fact, when Jan and Marion had asked you guys, and you and Cheryl and Sharon all got some stuff together, there's a wonderful pile of the renos at Birch, the new Birch, I mean Alcorn. And it's just, you know, all of you.
Practice, so I was there every day supervising
I know.
clients.
All of you standing there looking shell-shocked right now. So we've got all of that too. Which, by the way, we will make copies in the archives of whatever we can use there, and we'll get back the originals to you as soon as I can do that.
Well, and a special thank you to Sophia, whose hand imprint is obvious at every corner of this evening tonight, and how much background work has gone into preparing. And it was Sophia's idea that we start with your law firm. So thank you, Sophia.
Well, it was never my place to practice law, but my joy was being with you people. So I lasted longer. I used to say the golden handcuffs kept me in private practice longer than I probably would have stayed. I'm sort of like you, Jill. Anyway, thank you all so much. It was great. And, there's a little more food left before you go.